All right, we're going to start this contract negotiating and pitfall. My name's Matt. I am a PA by trade, and I am a professor at a local PA program. And I got asked to do this talk because a lot of students were struggling with, what to look at in contracts and what to be aware of and what to look out for and what to negotiate and how to negotiate. And so I put together this presentation and gave it to them. This goes about 45 minutes to an hour. And so I just want to go through this and get this out online so people that maybe are struggling with medical contracts can have an idea of things to look at for and look for and maybe things to think about as far as their contract is concerned. And the first thing I want to give a caveat to is I am not a lawyer. And so a lot of the stuff I picked up just from reading contracts, looking things up, talking to people. And so again, I'm not a lawyer. I think you strongly believe that you should have a lawyer at least peek over a contract, unless you feel really comfortable with what you're signing. But I want to get started. And the big thing that I want to kind of stress and emphasize in all of this is every good negotiation, both parties feel screwed, both parties feel happy. It's a meet in the middle, right? And so, but you have to have leverage, and your leverage is your skill set as a PA, as a medical provider. And so your ultimate leverage is you have to be able to say no. You have to be able to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't think that's the way it should be. I'm going to pursue other places, pursue other jobs. Now, if you have only one job and it's the only job that you want, then that doesn't put you in this place of power or leverage. And in a negotiation, you have to have leverage to be able to give and take. The other part of that is you want to be able to walk away, but you also want to get things that you must-haves or nice-to-haves, or, I can walk away from that because it has to give and take. You just can't take everything and expect you're going to get everything that you want. So ultimately, you have to understand what your contract is. And a contract is between you and the employer, and it sets out in terms what your job is, what your compensation is, what the benefits are, what they're going to cover, what they're not going to cover, how do you get fired, how do you quit. All of those things are in a contract, but they're all in lawyer talk, legalese. And so you have to be really good at reading a contract because some of the phrases like they use can be kind of ambiguous. They can be kind of misleading, and so you have to look at those lines. You almost have to go line by line and highlight stuff, but you want to ultimately protect yourself. And just kind of like a process of this is every time you get a contract, everything is negotiable. Now, they can say no. That doesn't mean it's not negotiable. They just aren't willing to negotiate on that. So everything's negotiable in a contract. You can take things in, you can add things out. And so it's important to kind of understand that, is that really what you're looking at is super important. So always ask questions on things you're not familiar with. Ultimately, even when you ask questions, it kicks the can down the road a little bit longer. And what that does is gives you the potential to find other jobs, to give you the potential to apply for other jobs, to interview for other jobs. Most employers are well aware that you're not just applying to one job and that's the only job that you're going to have on your docket. And so applying to multiple jobs and using them to pit against each other is a form of leverage. Well, hey, at this job, they're offering this. Do you think you guys can do that? If you have a place that you would rather work, but you have this contract that's really good, hey, I got this in another contract. Do you mind, matching that or at least coming up a little bit to where that's at? And so those are little tips and tricks that you can use is if you can keep Now, if you're at a point where you're like, I need a job, well, then it's hard to have leverage in that situation. But if you're in a spot where you're like, yep, I know I have time, I can look for multiple jobs, then having 2 or 3 options on the table is really, really important, but also like easy to negotiate then because you have leverage. Well, I have this job offering this, I have this job offering this. Well, can you match that? Can you do that? And big takeaway from here is do not sign a contract the day you get it. I always call it the 24-hour rule. So when they send it to you, you can look at it, go do your screaming, go do your celebrating that you had a contract offered, but do not sign it within the first 24 hours. And why I mean that is you have a chance to go through it. So let's say you get a contract at 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Hey, do you mind if I look this over and get back to you within the next 24 to 48 hours? Thank you so much for the contract. I just want a chance to take a look at it. Now you've kicked the can down the road 24 to 48 hours. Now, here's the tip. Here's the trick. Is you're going to go through that contract with someone, you're going to go through it with someone that knows the law, you're going to go through it with a lawyer, you're going to go through it with someone that's looked through a bunch of contracts. You're going to write, about 8 to 10 things that are maybe alarming or, what you might want to change, what you like, what you don't like, pros, cons of the contract. Write about 8 to 10 things down on that paper. And then take that paper, set it aside, think about the things for the next 24 to 40 hours. You just asked to review it for the next 24 to 48 hours. And especially if that is on like a Friday, well, now you say, hey, you know what? I'll get back to you on Monday. Perfect. You gotten yourself, or, if it's a Tuesday, hey, you've gotten yourself at least till Thursday morning. So what you'll do is then on Thursday morning, or 24 to 48 hours later, you'll come back and say, hey, I have a few questions. Now you'll take 2 to 3 questions that you feel are the most important on your contract, and you'll ask those questions. So now you send that away, and now it gives them 24, 48 hours. Hopefully they're pretty responsive to answer those questions. But you also know that you have 6 to 8 more questions there. And so when they come back with their response at 24 to 48 hours later, you say, okay, good to know. I was looking more through the contract and I potentially have more questions. And so it's this back and forth of negotiation, but not showing all your cards. It's like poker, right? You get 5 cards on regular card, on Texas Hold'em, and you don't want to show your face. You don't want to show your hand. Show your hand, everybody knows what you have. So you want to have a few things that you think are important, and never, ever, ever feel pressured to sign on the first day. Okay. We're going to break down parts of the contract that I think are important to every contract. And so everybody thinks base salary is the end-all be-all of contract negotiation. I just need the highest base salary. But you have to look at different things that are included. And we'll break down those, what I think are important, because if you take a little bit lower base salary, but get like a really good 401k or really good vacation time, and your salary is a little bit lower, those things balance out. And so I think it's important to kind of know where you potentially need to be, but this is also where research comes in. Is if you're AAPA members, you can use the AAPA salary report. A lot of states have their own state data. And so if you're moving to a state, email the state or join their state association and see if they have any information about total pay packages, that type of thing, in your specialty, in your area. Then you want to clarify, okay, so a lot of times there's a base salary, but then there's total compensation. And so a lot of times that's like in an RVU based, or if you have a bonus base structure, you'll get this base salary rate where you'll get most companies are every 2 weeks, some companies are every month. So here's your base salary check that you're going to get every 2 weeks or every month. But then potentially you're going to get a bonus quarterly or annually or every 6 months. You want to be able to know what your bonus structure is, and how the bonus is figured out. But breaking the salary. Is it hourly? Is it salary? Is it productivity based? So an hourly, a lot of times are shift workers, urgent cares, ERs, that type of thing. If you get into salary, you want to have it specified what they typically think your hours are for salary. Otherwise, they keep adding things on. Let's say you're working some kind of trauma, ortho trauma, where you have a call schedule, right? And then you say, okay, your base salary is 120,000, and that's all. Well, all of a sudden you start adding call. Yeah, they're call responsibility, but we're not adding it. It's just part of your job. Well, now you're on call once a month, every weekend, once a month. And so now you added, 48 hours, if it's just Saturday and Sunday, once a month of call. That's not included in your base salary. So if you have a job that requires call, making sure that they have it, spelled out what the call pay is, what type of call that is. Is it primary? Is it secondary call? Is it answering phone calls? Because if your primary call, you're answering calls about a Tylenol at 2 a.m. from a floor. So those are all things that you have to think about of what the call is and what's included in that salary. And then productivity based. I tend to tell new graduates to stay away from anything productivity based until at least year 3 to 5. Because the first year or two, you're trying to figure out who you are, how you do your job. You might want to switch specialties. So I try to tell them to stay away from anything productivity based, because you have to start slow and figure out what you know, figure out what you don't know, get into a rhythm of practicing. And so I think anything productivity based, you should stay away from for about 3 to 5 years until you have some experience, you have a patient load, you have a volume, and you're seeing a lot of patients on a regular basis, where then productivity comes in. Also, making sure that's written into the contract. How does your salary review go? At how many times, or when is it review? Is it annually? Is it biannually? Is it your contract's 3 years, so we won't review it for 3 years? You want to have an idea of when your salary is going to be reviewed, how you get increases, what you potentially get increases from. And then the big thing, like it says there, always know your market value. Data is the best negotiation tool. So getting those AAPA reports, getting the state data, it's hard to argue data. And when you bring it and say, hey, here's what a new grad is making in this specialty, and they're offering you 20,000 less, you're like, here it ultimately is. It says here in the salary report. So wondering if we can meet in the middle, kind of go from there. Okay. Bonuses and incentives. Bonuses and incentives are a big thing, especially, if it adds a whole bunch of money to your contract, or quarterly bonuses. So a couple things that stand out to me are sign-on bonuses. Sign-on bonuses are really, really nice, and a lot of companies will do them. The thing you have to be careful on a sign-on bonus is repayment, what you have to do if you leave, or how much it is. And because I've seen people get a sign-on bonus, and this is why I say you have to be really careful on the repayment, on the terms if you leave, that type of thing. Because I've seen people, so a sign-on bonus is a bonus, so you usually get taxed at a higher level, so you're already getting taxed higher. So let's say you get 10 grand. You felt awesome, you negotiated this 10 grand sign-on bonus. Well, so with taxes, you'll probably get about 7,500, 7,000. Then a lot of contracts will say you owe us back with interest if you leave before a year, if you leave before 2 years. And then what happens is the interest rate now, when you leave in a year or two, now you're paying like 12,500 because they charge you interest on the 10,000, not the 7,500 that you got. And so now you just lost $5,000. So really your sign-on bonus was 2,500 bucks. And so it's like, you got to be careful on those. Now, if you feel like you get sign-on bonuses like a year and there's no repayment after a year, okay, fine. But you also have to know that a sign-on bonus goes and factors into your income. Okay, home relocation payment. That is a lot of times important if you're moving cities, moving states, for an employer. There's kind of the caveat with 2 home relocation payments. Make sure it spells out some people say you have access up to $5,000, which then you submit receipts. And if you get receipts for up to $3,000, well, then you left $2,000 on the table of relocation. Some will say, here's $5,000. If it costs you $7,500, we're only giving you $5,000, but at least you got the $5,000. A lot of times, home relocation payments are not taxed. Let me just confirm. Yeah, a little bit is saying is generally a taxable income, and so that's where you like if they give you the 5,000, but you don't spend the 3,000, or you only spend 3,000, now you potentially are taxed. Versus here where they're just reimbursing you, which then it wouldn't be taxed, I believe. So you have to consult like a CPA on that. But just being careful on that. And then your RVU bonuses. I had a weird one that I got a contract from a student that said, okay, so from $30,000 to $40,000 in billables, it was a 10% bonus, and this was monthly. From $40,000 to $50,000 was a 15% bonus, and then from $50,000 to $60,000 was a 20% bonus. However, there was one line in the contract. I'd have to look up exactly what it said, but what it ultimately said is, so let's say you had $41,000 in billables. Okay, so you're like, oh, cool, I'm in that 40 to 50, I'm getting a 15% bonus. No, what it was 10% of the first 10, and then 15% of that 1% of that $1,000. So it was like it was just worded. It was like this nickel and diming stuff that I was like, gosh, that's really, really unfortunate. So like, yeah, if you build out $52,000 that month, you would get 10% bonus on the 10,000 from 30 to 40. You'd get 15% on the 10,000 from 40 to 50, and then you would get 20% on the 2,000. And so it like just was little nickel and diming, and that's what it looked like throughout the entire contract, is these little nickel and diming things. And so yeah, it was like, if you leave before like 5 o'clock, then we take potential hours of PTO. And like, what? If you don't have any patience, you want me to sit there? And so those are the things you got to watch out for. And looking at productivity bonuses, how are they collected? How often are they collected? Do you get to see the data? That would be my biggest thing, is I want to see the data that my RVU bonus is based off of. On top of not just RVUs, but like how many RVUs did they get? What's the factor? And then what the bonus is. So get spelled out transparency, transparency, transparency. And the other thing is, if you do get like a quality or performance bonus or incentives, making sure that criteria is spelled out in your contract, what you have to do, how you have to hit it, how often it's reviewed, and how do you get to see how you're doing along the way, and then how is that paid out? Is that quarterly? Is that biannually? You got to take a peek at those. So a big sign-on bonus looks great, but ultimately it could cost you a lot of money. And so sometimes it's better, if you can afford to not have a sign-on bonus, to negotiate in more salary. It might not be all up front, but over the course, if you stay there a few years, like if you go from let's say 120, and you say, I want to negotiate to $130,000 a year and I won't take a sign-on bonus. Well, at 2 years, that's 20 grand versus a $10,000 sign-on bonus for a 2-year contract. And so those are things that, again, everything's negotiable. Everything is, you can tweak and play with everything. Okay, next one. Here we go. Continuing ed. Continuing ed is very, very, very important, because it ultimately allows you to do your job, right? You have to have, as a PA, you have to have 100 hours every 2 years, 150 of category 1, 50 of category 2. And so you have to get continuing ed hours. And conferences are a great way to network, to learn from experts in the field, to to meet people in your field. And honestly, it's an easy way to get a free general vacation because most CME conferences are like half-day conferences in the morning or they go all day, but you can pick and choose when you come and go. I was just at an ER conference in Hawaii that was 7:30 a.m. to 12:30, and then the afternoons were off. And then it went like 2 days and then a day off and then 2 more days. So you got a chance to explore. And it was really good content, really good information. But you have to look at if you're getting CME, like the employer needs to help with that because it's important for your job. It's important to stay up to date, right? Negotiating CME is important because it's like, hey, you want me to be really good at my job? I need to be able to continue my education. Now, I've worked for an employer that had their whole online portal of all CME, and they included category 1. So they didn't give a ton of CME money. But if you look at a conference, like I just pulled up a conference because I was helping a student go through a contract, and they were like, well, I'm getting $1,000 for CME. And I said, look at the latest cardiology conferences. The latest cardiology conference, one conference registration, it was like $950 to go to the conference. That doesn't include the flights, the hotel, the food, the car rental, all that stuff getting to the conference. So you're already out. You're done with your CME money. So I would say a good average typical amount should be like $2,500 to $3,000. You can get your conferences, you can get a conference paid for, you can get there. You may have to have a little bit of money spent on your own, but you have to think about all of that, is the travel, the lodging, even the car rental, the gas for the car rental, that type of thing. And so also making sure when you look through a contract and see CME, the time allowed for CME as well. So some people will say, here's 6 weeks of PTO, but that includes a week for sick time and a week for CME. So you really have 4 weeks of vacation and then a week of sick time and a week of PTO or CME. Some people will say, they'll dissect it out. 4 weeks for CME or 4 weeks for vacation, a week of sick time and a week of CME. But you don't want to use your CME days, you don't want to use your vacation days to go on CME trips. Now, if they say, here's extra money, or here's extra time off, because your vacation time is to get away from medicine, to not do medicine, to do life, to continue that good work-life balance. And your CME time is work. CME is work. So you have to be compensated, or, like this, they give you 3 to 5 days extra on top of your vacation time to go to a CME conference. So something to think about, don't use vacation time on learning. Now, if you like to learn and you took a vacation and you want to read on your trip, fine, read on your trip. But if you're taking a CME day, that should hopefully not be included in your PTO because it is for your work. It's to maintain your license. It's for the employer. Hopefully that makes sense. I like the $2,500 to $3,000. The most I've seen is $5,000. I've seen a lot of $3,000, but kind of the worst I've seen is like $500 to $1,000. Like you can't even register for a conference, let alone get there. So be careful on that. Time off. Time off's really, really important. It's the work-life balance, right? How are you given your time off? I would say there's 2 types, really. There's the accrued versus the accrued versus like a lump sum. And so I kind of described that a little bit. So if you have your vacation days, your sick days, your personal days, how is that all combined? Do you have to call in on your sick days, or can you say, I just want to take a sick day? How does that work? Making sure it's spelled out. How do you call in sick? How do you do that? What happens? Who covers? A lot of us in medicine don't have someone to cover us, and so we kind of feel bad calling in sick. And so making sure that that's important to know what your sick time is. Are you given federal holidays off? I've seen employers that give federal holidays off, but they take your PTO, but they don't give you an option to work. And so it's like, well, you gave it to me off, but you took my PTO. Like that to me blows my mind. Like why would they take your time and they're not open in the clinic? But some will do it. Again, the PTO, does it accrue or is it front loaded? If you're starting a new job, ultimately, if you want to go somewhere, you might not have the PTO to go. If it's an accrual every paycheck, hopefully it's a front loaded. I prefer front loaded. Here's your lump sum. Here's your month off, and you can use it when you want it. Now, I got actually one of the TikTok followers. I have seen someone do something really shady and it wasn't spelled out, but like they worked with a physician, PA worked with a physician, and let's say the physician didn't feel like working the afternoon. Well, they canceled the schedule and then took PTO from the PA because they said, oh, you can go home. But it's like, no, the physician made I'm not working this afternoon. So they made the PA go home and they took their PTO. So like stuff like that, like it's crazy what employers try to get away with, and you have to stand firm. You have to stand up for yourself, and you ultimately need to know your worth. And I kind of talked about that CME. Is it an addition to, or do you have to use your normal PTO to go to CME? Hopefully you can get it. Okay, hopefully we're back. Now we're talking about licensing and certifications. I actually did a TikTok video on this, so if you go check out my profile, I did a TikTok video on this, and it's really, I can't stress this enough. It is very, very, very important and can be a potentially costly mistake if you allow the employer to put in your contract that you are responsible for your license and everything. Ultimately, it's a lot of money. And if we break it down, so you have to get a state license, and any state license, I think the highest was Mississippi, like $550. Most are between $200 and $300, and that's every 2 years. You have to get a state license. Well, then you add in your DEA registration, which is $888 every 3 years. You had your NCCPA license, which is $185 every 2 years. And then you think about things like AAP membership. You have your state association. The state of Iowa, and I know there's probably 20 to 30 other states, have what they call a controlled substance license. So on top of your DEA, you have to get approved by the state to write. So that's another $100 to $150. It ends up being about $1,800 to $2,000 every 2 to 3 years. Well, if you think, let's go that $2,000 over the course of 30 years, you're looking at, so 30 years, so that's 15 payments, you're looking at like $30,000 $30,000 in payments that like the employer should be covering. So it's very, 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 very important, and ultimately allows you to do your job. So I think it's very important for employers to pay for your DEA, your NCCPA, your state license, which I think is really important. And so negotiating that in and making sure that's in your contract is really important. Also, some employers will split up like CME and then like DEA licensing and stuff. Well, you have to figure out, like, my job requires ATLS, PALS, ACLS, BLS. Now, is that going to be included in your CME, which is required every 2 years? So do I have to pay out of my CME $3,000, the BLS, ACLS, PALS, ATLS, or is that just another separate expense that they will pay in this licensing and certifications? Well, if you need it for your job, the employer should pay for it. If you don't need it and want to do it, then that's on your own expense. And so if you need it to succeed in your job, like me, I need those. And so my employer pays for them. I need a DEA, my employer pays for that. I need my NCCPA, my employer pays for that. And then ultimately knowing if it's a payment or a reimbursement. Do you have to keep receipts, or do you have them do it for you, or how does that all work? And then when are you going to get reimbursed for that? Is it on a monthly base? Is it on a yearly base? These fees add up over the course of your career, and they're important for your job, so have the employer pay. Well, I want to go. All right. Malpractice insurance. This is vital, vital, vital for your protection, for you. The employer should pay for it, regardless. Like this is a hard and fast. It's important that the employer covers. Now, important to know what type of insurance it is. Okay, is there a claims made versus an occurrence? So a claims made type insurance was the insurance active? Let's say, and so you have to think about the statute of limitations. So a lot of statutes of limitations are 2 years. Some can be up to 10 years. And so the statute of limitations says that they cannot sue outside of the 2 years if on a medical malpractice. Now, like the state of Nebraska has this 10 years. So let someone say someone has surgery and 3 years later they find out something went wrong in surgery. Well, they didn't find it out until 3 years later. They still get an extra year to follow suit within that 10. And that's where that 2 and 10 years comes in Nebraska. And so it's really, really important to have claims made insurance, you can have claims made, but then making sure you have tail coverage, because if you leave and they get new insurance, well, then you're screwed because they don't have the same insurance. So what I'm saying is, like, let's say you see someone in 2025 and everything, what you think goes good. In 2027, we're still within that 2 years. They file a lawsuit. However, in 2026, your employer dropped the coverage and didn't get you tail coverage. Well, now you have zero protection in a claims made type because the insurance is not active at this point. Now, if they have tail coverage will cover you for those incidences. So it's important, but tail coverage can be expensive. So making sure the employer is covering the malpractice insurance and potentially, well, depends upon, typically you'll need tail coverage as well. But then there's an occurrence type malpractice insurance, which is if you were insured at the time of what potentially went wrong, if the insurance was active, it will cover it. This is typically a little bit more expensive insurance, and so it's kind of important to make sure that what your employers have and who's paying. You do not want to pay for your own malpractice insurance. I can guarantee you that. So keeping that in mind, making sure you have the right important insurance, talk to them about it, talk to them who's covering it, all that stuff. Okay. Excuse me. So it's another big negotiation, and understanding your benefits in retirement. A lot of times these aren't super negotiable because it's what they offer to all their employees. But do they offer health, dental, vision insurance? Do they have an HSA where they're putting money in, or just you can put money in? Do they have a 401k, a 403b? Do they have a pension? Are they offering life and disability insurance? Ultimately, you want to be in a place that, like, if you're working and get hurt and can't work, well, then you need something to cover you at that point. If you go on a trip and you break your leg and you can't work for your employee for a few weeks or months, you need something to cover you in that situation. And so those are all important things to think about in your benefits and your retirement. Now, if you have really good health insurance, but it's going to cost you $600 a month, well, I might need a higher salary to make up for so those are all things you have to look at and, put out on a paper, put out on a graph of what your 401k is, what type of match program do they have with the employers? So some employers will you're guaranteed to get 4% no matter what. Or if you want to put in money, they will only match what you put in. So let's say you have up to a 4% match, but if you put in 1%, they'll put in 1%. If you put in 2%, they'll put in 2%. So you have to look at all of that, and then talking to a financial advisor about what you should and what you think you should do, creating a savings account, that type of thing, and then flexible spending accounts, HSAs. If you have a high deductible plan, HSAs are a great benefit. as well as financially for savings and that type of thing. So it's really, really, really important to look at what your benefits are and how your benefits are paid, and even going down into, like, let's say you have a high deductible plan, so ultimately it's a deductible up until $7,500. Well, you're responsible till $7,500, and then is it 80-20 at that? Is it 70-30? Is it 100% coverage? Because if you think about it, if you have some underlying medical conditions and you go work and you hit your $7,500 deductible, well, all of a sudden it's like 50-50. So like the insurance covers 50, but you cover 50. All of a sudden, it's not really good insurance. Like, you're having to pay a ton out of pocket for having insurance already. And then the overall cost on all of that. So it's really, really important to understand what your benefits are and what your retirement is, what your HSA type thing accounts are as well. Okay, talking about schedule and call, making sure this is spelled out in your contract specifically. What are your expected hours? What are your expected shifts? How do they go about scheduling shifts? That type of thing is important. Like I kind of talked about, if you're going to take call, what are your call responsibilities? You hate to get in some, oh yeah, it's not that often. And then all of a sudden, 6 months in, it's like every weekend or every other weekend. Well, that wasn't what I signed up for. And so making sure a contract holds responsible the employer, it sets the expectations so you know what to expect. And then, how often are you on call, but what's the compensation for it? Is it just part of the salary? Well, that's free hours if it's part of the salary. Now, if everyone does it in the practice and it's, once every 10th week, okay, that might not be something so bad, but what are your expectations? Are you primary call? I used to work for an ortho trauma where we were primary call. We literally took the phone call in the middle of the night for an x-ray on, let's say a distal fibular fracture. Hey, what do you want to do to this at 2 a.m. from the ER? And so are you secondary call? Do they call the physician first? Do you have to go in on every patient? Do you just answer phone calls from home? What are your expectations from home? And that can even be built into your negotiation of like, okay, I'm expected to take call from home. Well, then maybe the employer needs to help me pay for my cell phone or give me a cell phone. Do I need a laptop? Do I need coverage at home? So I need to be able to negotiate those type of things to be able to take call. Is it an hourly for taking call at home? All of that needs to be talked about and written out in your contract. Same thing with weekend and holiday coverage. Like I kind of described earlier, are you given holidays off but then taking PTO, or are holidays actually off? And then what your overtime policy is. Some employers are adamant about no overtime, and if you go overtime, they won't pay it. And so if you just being really, really, really in depth on this is super important. And again, like my new grad tip says, call can be a major, major lifestyle factor. And so getting all the details of what your call is, who you're on call with, how do you take call, all those type of questions are very, very, very important because it ultimately could potentially affect your lifestyle if you're on call every weekend or every other month or once every 8 weeks or whatever it is. So being really, really careful about having them spelled out is important. Every contract should have a termination clause in it. Ultimately, how do you quit? What happens if you get fired? All those type of things. Typically, a contract with a PA, NP physician is a 60 to 90 day clause. It typically takes them about 60 to 90 days to credential, and that doesn't include finding someone. So they have to go through the interview process. They have to go through finding people, opening the job application, that type of thing. So making sure that you understand your 60 to 90 day clause, because you can't, if you're going to try to look for a new job, then you have to give a certain notice. Now, ultimately, this is where some of it can be protected or you have to look at what these with and without termination, without cause termination clauses in the contract. Without cause is what can they do? Can they fire you on any given day, any morning, just if they feel like it? Or do they have to have, with cause? They have to show cause of what you did, how you did it, are really important. to look at. The other thing that I'm super important to look at is non-competes. I think there's a lot of up and coming stuff about it's hard to enforce non-competes, but ultimately, if you're in a smaller town and you work for a private practice, and they start treating you bad, and you're like, I'm going to go to a different private practice, and all of a sudden your contract is you can't work in family medicine within a 20-mile radius for 2 years once leaving. Oh, well, now what do? You have to find a different specialty in that town, or you have to move somewhere or look outside of the 20-mile radius. How long are those? A lot of them are for a year. Some of them can even be like, okay, oncology, you can't work in oncology in the area for 1 year. But hopefully they're not limiting you. I'm not a big fan of non-competes. Non-competes can be taken out. You have to ask, but if that's something that's worth it to you. It's worth it to me because I work in ER. So if they're like, well, you can't go work in another ER, well, then I'm like, what? That's not okay. So yeah, if they can be negotiated, even if you can negotiate, what? I potentially see myself in 3 to 5 years working at this practice or doing this, and it's 18 miles from where I live, and the non-competes for 20 miles. Hey, let's move it to 15. I'm fine with your 15. I see all this. I'll see but I'll just move it back a little bit. Is it a specialty limitation? So making sure that you really, if you do have a non-compete, do some research in the state. Are they defendable, or can you negotiate in the terms of the deal as well? So, like I said before, everything is negotiable. However, you have to be able to walk away as your leverage, or you have to have another contract that potentially has some details. And so everything is negotiable, but you have to have leverage. Also, like I said, a good negotiation is both parties feel good, but both parties feel screwed. Have a couple must-haves. If you have a love of the employer, but they have a bad contract, see where you can get it to that mediocre to decent on a couple things. If that's salary, if that's benefits, if that's time off, what are negotiable, and it's, what are the must-haves for you in your contract? And if it's not in the contract, it didn't happen, or it won't happen. I've seen some say, if you ask them in an email, can we review the contract in 6 months, and maybe potentially once I get off training, my salary bump up? Oh yeah, that sounds like we might be able to do that. And then all of a sudden 6 months from now, they'll be like, no, it's not in the contract. We can't do that. We don't do that. So making sure you get those things really, really spelled out. And then ultimately, I think using AI, ChatGPT is one that I use, but to write good professional emails and prompts with negotiations, saying I would, ultimately having data, trying to stay away from I feel statements are also another secret important tip, because I feel statements don't have a lot of data to back them up. Now, if you say, hey, according to the AAPA, a new grad in this specialty in this state makes 120, you're offering me 100, I would like to get to 115. Can we do that? Like, it's hard to like, as an employer, to go, oh crap, here's the data. And I'll copy and paste stuff like that into the email, or copy and paste a graph into the email and saying, hey, look at this. Here's the industry standard, or those type of things. The other thing that I will say in kind of my closing remarks is, I heard it once. I don't know who to give it credit to, but the saying is, they will have your job posting listed on the internet before your obituary is posted. So what that means to me is take care of yourself, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. It's super, 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 super important to take care of yourself and to make sure that you get the contract that you want. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but hopefully some of these help in contract negotiations and looking at contracts and looking at different lines in the, I would read through it, highlight it, and again, kind of use that stepwise approach, which gives you another 7 to 10 days, maybe potentially, to find something, interview, negotiate, and then use multiple contracts to make the best contract for you. Pitting them against each other is super important. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for listening in, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks, and have a great day.